This episode is brought to you by Voyager and Matcha. Stay tuned for more information on both later in this episode. What is up, everybody? I'm Scott Melker, and this is the Wolf of Wall Street podcast, where twice a week I talk to your favorite personalities from the worlds of Bitcoin, finance, trading, art, music, sports, politics, basically anyone with a good story to tell. Today's guest founded Swan Bitcoin in 2019, which has already become one of the most important names in the Bitcoin investing space. Cory has an extensive background in traditional finance, but what excites me most is his passion for Bitcoin and the revolution he and I both believe that it will bring. If you made it to the Bitcoin conference in Miami, you probably saw the Swan tent, which hosted a massive tent, which was the hangout for the biggest names in the Bitcoin space. Having Cory on the show today is my goal to better understand the recent developments happening in the Bitcoin world and what he sees in the future for our beloved asset, and of course, what's happening at Swan. Cory Klippsten, thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. And I love the expanded focus. I hadn't heard that pitch for the show. I've got to catch up on some recent episodes, man. This sounds really cool.
Yeah, thank you. So listen, man, everybody's talking about since Miami, El Salvador, of course, right? They passed a law identifying Bitcoin as legal tender. It even says so now on Wikipedia that it's one of their national currencies. And within just 48 hours of that announcement, we're already showing videos of wells being dug to mine renewable, clean Bitcoin from volcanoes. Did you see that coming?
It was not on my, as they say, it was not on my 2021 Bitcoin bingo card, was the volcano mining in El Salvador. But it was nice to see. And, clearly they had a pretty solid PR rollout plan ready to go. So you could kind of hit the one announcement and then, follow it up with a few different things. It's kind of funny because he acted on the Twitter Spaces a couple nights ago. So basically, if you didn't catch this, and we actually posted the audio on the Swan Signal YouTube. So youtube.com/Swan Signal. We have the audio from the Twitter Spaces a couple nights ago. Basically, the president of El Salvador was hanging out in Twitter Spaces from the presidential residence, giving the play-by-play of the bill passing in Congress, which was just the most incredible sort of real-time thing to be a part of and to watch. And, he played it slow when somebody was asking about, you should get into Bitcoin mining. Like, he didn't tip his hand at all. And then the next day they came out with that announcement. Like, he knew it. It was in his hip pocket. He was just waiting for the bill to pass.
Yeah, he was actually dismissive, not even on our radar, basically, is kind of the route that he went. And then a day later, it was like, I've instructed them to, check out the volcanoes. And 4 hours later, there's the videos of, geysers spurting from the ground.
Right. And he knows the right narrative. He's like, by the way, all of that emission, that's steam. That's 100% water vapor, just so the ESG people don't freak out.
Okay. So, and in the same day that you see those videos, you see Elizabeth Warren and Senate committee hearings and just spewing the same old FUD and garbage about energy usage and Bitcoin mining. What do you make of that absolute bipolarity and even cognitive dissonance, knowing that everything's moving renewable?
Yeah, well, I think this is good for Bitcoin because anytime it's out in the public sphere and people go and read and do the investigation, if they do enough research, they end up becoming a huge fan. And so that will happen among even her constituents. Some of them will turn over. Maybe as importantly, political opponents who are sort of inclined to go against whatever someone like Elizabeth Warren says are even more likely to go down the rabbit hole and understand what Bitcoin is. So, I think when any politician takes a hard stance on Bitcoin, pro or against, it's very good for Bitcoin.
I tend to agree. It's just interesting to see that stance after those exact criticisms.
The juxtaposition was
so
hilarious.
Many times. Right. But also it's just like, it's the same criticisms every cycle, right?
Until you actually do it yourself,
energy.
Like those, it's those talking points are there, right? And it's the same things that Dalio was saying about Bitcoin in 2016, 2017, before he did his own research. It's the same thing that any of these Silicon Valley VCs like Calacanis or whoever will say about Bitcoin until they actually sit down and do their own research and stop listening to their social circle. So what happened to me, obviously listening to my social circle and professional circle being in Silicon Valley circles and investing in tech companies and stuff, like I had it all wrong because I was listening to Andreessen Horowitz and Union Square Ventures and these people that I respected from non-cryptocurrency space things. And, the narrative was always like, Bitcoin is MySpace and Facebook is around the corner, and this is tech, not money. It's, I'm not a fan of Bitcoin. I like the underlying technology. And it takes a while to sort through all of that because you have, in many cases, decades of trusting these voices that have been right on lots of other important things and happen to be wrong on this one.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's also, I mean, it can't go unnoticed that the hearing and what they were really talking about was central bank digital currencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So of course they're going to be dismissive or even aggressive against Bitcoin when talking about their own poor competitor that is actually, a more superior version of fiat, if you want to call it that, for the central bank.
Yeah, I mean, I love the tack that Michael Saylor is taking, which is also one shared by Nick Bhatia, and I think even Safety has talked about it this way, which is that the dollar and Bitcoin game theoretically probably will coexist for a long, long, long time, and there is no reason for like a hard landing Weimar Republic style hyperinflation for the dollar. Bitcoin should be a reserve asset, and you can still use the dollar as a medium of exchange for a long, long, long time with all kinds of policy levers still available to the US government and the legislature and spending programs or whatever. And it can kind of have a soft landing. You don't need to rip this thing out and replace it with Bitcoin. It doesn't make any sense to do that. It would be wildly disruptive and unfair to all the participants of an economy that are completely built in layers on top of the dollar, with all of the incentives that and sort of the rules and that exist in the current system. So I think you have to have, a slow transition to coexistence first, and then we'll just see how things play out. It may replace in the long run, but it doesn't even have to. It could just be, a massive asset, as Saylor says, that lives underneath. But it's just great that it'll provide a check on that spending because people always can voluntarily opt out and store their value in Bitcoin rather than in, centrally controlled fiat currency.
Right. But do you believe that the government is incentivized to allow them to coexist peacefully?
I think the people that comprise the government are, and I don't believe that there is a cabal of people coordinated, organized, and powerful enough, even inside the US government, let alone coordinating across all of the other countries, to be able to go against, the truth and power inherent with Bitcoin. I think we're past it. I think it's past. I started the company when a big part of the mission statement was making sure we could get to a point that the US government would never like outright ban it or turn off the on-ramps or whatever. And I actually believe that in the last, 15, 16 months that enough has happened that isn't really possible anymore.
I agree. I mean, listen, I'm not a conspiracy theorist and I don't like to dig too deep, but I can't imagine that the Elon Musks and Michael Saylors and Dalios of the world invest in something without making a call to make sure that it's not going to be regulated away or made illegal, right? I mean, we're talking about exceptionally connected people who are making significant investments in the space. So you have to imagine that they know that it's not going to be banned.
And yeah, I mean, it goes back to January. I can't remember which one it was, but when Ross and Saylor were talking, Ross from NYDIG and Saylor at that little conference in January, big conference in January, where if you were looking at a bell curve distribution of the likely outcomes for Bitcoin, we basically chopped off the left end of the distribution. Like if Brad Sherman and Elizabeth Warren get together and try to do something contra Bitcoin, there are going to be free speech lawsuits. There's going to be privacy lawsuits, property lawsuits, like lobbyists. I mean, so many corporations at this point have vested interest in Bitcoin continuing. It'll be a really, really well-funded and well thought through battle on every front. Yeah. And I just don't see them getting it through. Nobody wants to spend all of their political capital being against freedom.
Right. Yeah. Or again, something that they still view as too small to go all in reputationally on, I would imagine. So I guess the question is, are the Elizabeth Warrens and the Mungers and the Buffetts of the world, are they willfully ignorant? Is it they just haven't done the work? Are they too set in their ways to even ever understand? Or is there an ulterior motive here that the central bank digital currency, in Warren's case, is coming and, obviously they want Bitcoin out of the way? Or is there something more sinister? Or do you really just think they just don't get it and they never will because they're so set in their ways?
Well, politicians of the establishment from either party that basically are in the patronage game. So, Pelosi at the top of one patronage pyramid, and then, the what's his name, Mitch, probably at the top of the other side. Those two have these massive, K Street patronage networks. And the reason you can never oust Pelosi is because all of the lieutenants and all of the people that they don't want to get displaced. So as long as they can cart her out on a life support, they'll just keep her alive as long as possible so that nobody can mess with it. It's a whole power structure, right? And it's the same on the Republican side. And this is not unique to the US. It's how it is in a lot of countries, right? There's a strong incentive to keep the money flowing through the network that currently exists. We've seen this in, the Democratic machine in Chicago for 40 years, and Philly with Rendell, and, on and on and on and on. These things happen, right? So they don't want to give up the ability to lobby people and use power to get money for them and their friends.
Yeah.
So they will fight for that as long as they possibly can, because that's what butters their bread.
Totally. That makes sense. So speaking of central bank digital currencies, what's your view on them in general? Obviously, we've seen the evolution in China. They're very rapidly moving towards that. And some other countries, the United States, understandably far behind. But I mean, digital money is a dream for a central bank, right? So what's your position on CBDCs and their relationship to Bitcoin? Bearish, bullish? Will it drive more adoption or less?
When people see how creepy CBDCs are, I think it will kind of drive them more naturally toward freedom and wanting less government control. So I think that's probably an educational vector for humanity to learn more about what money actually is and how much better it could be. When the government gives you $200 and tells you that you can only spend it on, this brand, or, going to the movies or whatever it is, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse as governments naturally sort of get lobbied, get paid off, and work things into bills such that your money gets stolen and diverted to people that are connected to power. That's the natural progression of what will happen with CBDCs. And I don't think anybody wants that. We should be able to spend our money how we choose. And it's never free money. It's being stolen from you. It's being stolen from savers if they print it.
That's the natural evolution of every fiat currency and government in history, right? And so you have to imagine that a central bank digital currency, making that digital faster, just accelerates that process.
Yeah. The US has to export the dollar to keep our current system going. So they will try to make the dollar usable. And as fiat currencies, as weaker currencies fail around the world, they'll try to figure out ways to get the dollar used there, and they'll be helpful. And I don't think they're going to step in the way of making the dollar more useful in El Salvador via Strike and a bunch of other companies. They'll probably be fine with that. And they like these countries being dollarized. They want to export dollars and import cheap goods and services, right?
Yep.
So that can keep this gravy train running longer if they can have the dollar used in digital forms. I think it's a big reason why you saw, Brian Brooks say, we're never going to have a Fed coin. We'll just have guidelines and regulations, and, probably be just fine with USDT and USDC and TUSD and GUSD and whatever else you guys want to come up with.
Right.
That's broadly stable coins pegged to the dollar, backed by the dollar, 1-to-1 or with a basket of whatever is probably fine for the Fed and the dollar system. As far as the yuan, they're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. They're just speeding off a cliff. I'm such a bear on the paper tiger that is the Chinese economy and the CCP's iron grip on their people, and just how much more insular they have to become as growth falls off a cliff. And they're just facing a massive demographic population bomb. Their economy and population and situation was, if you follow Peter Zion, which I do, and I read a lot of supporting things that he points to and that other people do, I think China peaked last year and will not have it as good again, probably for a century.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's interesting because
They're going to make a
China,
lot of noise with the Olympics next year and rolling out
yeah,
their digital wallets to everybody that goes to the Olympics. And they're going to make everybody pay with this digital yuan. You're going to have to download the wallet and use it for everything in the Olympic
yep.
Village and all the tourists, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Ship's
Right.
going
And they're
down.
cracking, and they're once again, I mean, China FUD is part of the same ransomware criminal energy FUD cycle that we see repeatedly, and India bans, of course, and coming back are the repeated FUD cycle. But it does seem that China is getting a bit more aggressive, certainly with miners and with Bitcoin. Do you
Somebody
think that
sent me a
that's
front page
reactionary?
of, by the way, somebody sent me a front page of a paper in India today that said they were planning to classify Bitcoin as an asset.
Correct. Yeah, the India
So-
time. So yeah, so we know that entire part of this news cycle was completely false. It was recycled news and completely misconstrued. And it makes sense for countries to do that. But do you think that that China's ban on Bitcoin has anything to do with that central bank digital currency rollout that you're talking about, or do you think it's just time and they're worried about the environmental effects? Or
it's not the
what do you make of
environmental
it?
effects. I think it's actually, I think it's energy competition. I think it's like internally in their own economy. So they're trying to become more energy independent, just for normal functioning of the economy. There's a wide swath of the country right now that's rationing power because they don't have enough. They got in a trade spat with Australia that was providing the coal to fire the electricity plants in like a couple of provinces that are heavy on industry and manufacturing. And so, yeah, I think that's very possibly part of what's going on with the reduction in Bitcoin mining or whatever it is. But I think they're also not stupid. Like Bitcoin destroys their plans for the digital yuan. I mean, the digital yuan and one belt, one road is a Hail Mary from 300 yards that even Michael Vick or Tom Brady couldn't make that pass. They've got to thread like 9 needles in a row to survive and keep power over the next few decades. But that's what they're trying to do with the digital yuan and, stadium diplomacy in Africa and trying to get access to all these resources. At the end of the day, like they're hemmed in by a bunch of neighbors that don't like them. And they're essentially in, full blown economic and internet warfare with a much more powerful foe in the United States. And it's just not looking good for them.
What I find interesting is that it's viewed as a negative of the cycle, what's happening in China, while still having this energy debate. But I think you can totally spin it and say, listen, like less dependence on China for mining is less centralization. And it's a much bigger move towards more responsible miners using renewables in other parts of the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm more concerned with the diversity of location of miners. That's a much bigger thing for me. And we know as of a couple of months ago, the next 12 months, the last 2 months plus the 10 coming, that over half of ASIC manufacturing globally were slotted for delivery to North America.
It's amazing.
So it's just booming. And, I'm an advisor to Riot Blockchain, the NASDAQ listed public miner. And you've seen, Marathon basically just get whipped into shape by all the bullying of toxic Bitcoiners that hate patent trolls and hate people doing things anti-Bitcoin. And now their new CEO has been in there for 5 weeks and he's saying all kinds of the right things and doing the right things. And, they signaled for Taproot and they got rid of their stupid, no blood coins, whatever. Mr. Blunderful storyline.
Green crypto, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So like all that stuff will go away. Don't pay attention to these altcoins trying to do like carbon credit bundled with Bitcoin. That's a scam. Kevin O'Leary is a scam. Mara was a scam. Looks like they've turned a new leaf. Thank God. All of that is just noise.
And going back to talking about the U.S. government and CBDCs and all that, we just saw May numbers come out, 5% inflation year over year.
Was that today?
That literally, we're talking on June 10th, came out today, 5% consumer good price increase since last May.
I've been on meetings for the last 2.5 hours. I mean, people that I was 5%. Reading earlier in the week were saying that it was freak out time if it was over 3.
Yep, 5%.
What are the markets doing?
There's been no major reaction. It's funny and interesting, the crypto market certainly seems to just be absorbing everything right now and not really reacting. But 5% May to May. I mean, that seems like it's approaching panic button time. And when you see that CPI chart, now we're down there with like the Turkeys and the Brazils and the Mexicos, and we're not up top, and the Russias, and we're not up top with the Japans, you know. So
No.
it's really interesting.
Wow, that's a huge number.
Yeah.
Be interesting to, I mean, obviously they're going to spin it and say it's because, you know, prices were depressed, you know, post pandemic onset last year or whatever. But, you know, like you said, that's got to tick some alarm bells, and these things tend to have sort of pro-cyclical effects, and they tend to run away from you. I wonder what policy levers they can pull there.
It's really a crazy number. So I'm curious. I want to dig more into what you guys are doing specifically. Obviously, there's all this crazy news, but you know, you started in 2019, correct? So
started the company, but we didn't actually launch until March 30th of 2020. So it's actually been 14 months.
Timing is really incredible when you look back. You know, knowing that March 12th was like the day that crypto died, right?
No, it was, and I think we actually did our first like alpha group trades were like Thursday and Friday. It was the 12th and the 13th. Like, I think I'm the first user in the database, and I think it's March 12th.
It's unbelievable. I mean, the worst day in the history of crypto. Although when you look back now, it's not such a negative, right? Of course, it's a blip on the screen, but at the time,
as far as people, if you multiply like number of people times amount of stress, that's probably the worst. I would say as far as like historically, like the worst stress was probably that time it went from like 80 cents to $1, which you can watch that YouTube video, but there were very few people involved at the time.
Right. And so I guess some would argue with the level of adoption that the recent drop was probably emotionally or just as difficult as March 2020.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I don't know, because there were a lot of institutions buying this time, and there's been like a lot of retail adoption, but I don't know if it's been like, you know, look at the numbers. I think that retail, in my view, has probably underperformed as far as, you know, new people coming in. You know, we hit it pretty hard in 2017 and got a lot of people in, and a lot of those people probably came back around for this bull market. But you know, if there was like maybe 10x adoption from 2015 to 2017, it feels more like another 2x maybe from 2019 to 2021. It wasn't as big of a flood. Obviously, our numbers are crazy because we're going on small numbers, so you can't really look at I can't look at my numbers and say like, well, that's happening industry wide, but you can look at you know, Coinbase's numbers as a good proxy and say like, well, it kind of appears they kind of doubled over the last year, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, the on-chain metrics, when you look at this drop, it seems somewhat clear that it was new buyers that panic sold, and that the old
as wallets, it usually is.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But that's a more bullish narrative, obviously, right? Because when the big money's buying or holding, you know that there's a floor. Is that what you're seeing? I mean, speaking of what you guys are doing.
If you think about it, I mean, it's a pretty bananas run up from, you know, 5K to 60K in a year, you know, like, you know, and realistically more like, you know, whatever, 7 or 8K, notwithstanding the March 12th drop and quick bounce back, but still it's a crazy run up. So I think a pullback is very healthy. I think it's good for people to understand that, you know, moon math is a meme. Yeah. It ain't real. And that thing is a market. And while we've had cycles historically, you know, the percentage of the number of coins extant that have been mined keeps going up, and the number of new coins being mined each day keeps going down. So obviously, by definition, the effect of new supply versus the total supply of Bitcoins for sale, 18 million or 14 million or whatever, that keeps going down. So by definition, like the new flow matters significantly less over time. Right. And I think you see that these cycles are looking weirder and different. And, you know, like we had a 380% run up from the depths of December 2018 up through, you know, June 26th of 2019 before crashing back down to where we were again almost. Yeah. You know, and now we're in another bull market, and now we've pulled back like a lot. We went from 65 to 30. Yeah. It was more than a 50% drop. Yeah. But I also don't think that we're done with this bull market, but, you know, but I also think, you know, in in my view, and this is just something I do for thinking about my own personal finances and, you know, company finances and how to finance Swan and think about hiring and stuff like that. Like, I have to handicap the peak of this cycle or whatever it is as being a bit lower than probably what I was looking at, you know, prior to the drop from 65 to 30. If we'd gone from like 65 to 45 and then charged right back up to 75 or 80, then I'd be looking at 250, 300 or something like that. But I think we should all, as Bitcoiners, give ourselves like a resounding round of applause if we hit like, you know, 150 or even 120 before an extended bear market. That would be an amazing.
Right. Sort of as you said, I mean, you're also running a business, right? I mean, you have to scale at the lower end of your estimation and not at the highest potential.
Yeah, you don't necessarily want to get out over your skis and then have to sell, you know, half the company in a down round because you ran out of money.
Yeah.
And
so what do you guys
by firing people?
Yeah. So talk more about the business for people who don't know, because
of course,
said it's a year old, you know?
Yeah, sure. So we sell Bitcoin. We're just an on-ramp, US focused. We do bank transfers in the US, wire transfers in the US, and then wire transfers internationally. So we are global, but only funding by wire transfer outside the US. We're really well known for extremely easy to set up automatic recurring purchase plans with the lowest fees in the US on that. So our fees are 60 to 80% lower than the Coinbase app and about half of Cash App for setting up automatic recurring purchase plans. And then we have smash buys, obviously, so you can just go and, you know, automatically buy, and we'll float you the money till your ACH gets there, but you locked in the price. And so we do a huge volume with that. And then we have a really beefed up private client services division now, which we kind of rolled out quietly in January, but really ramped up in April by hiring a couple of managing directors. And now we have a third. So that's been exciting to see that. And this is like, you know, really someone to talk to for high net worth individuals, for CFOs, CEOs, fund managers, you know, real high touch customer service. 95% of those conversations, like the content of, if you're talking to somebody for an hour, like 55 minutes is just going to be about Bitcoin. It's not that complicated, but people have a lot of questions. And they want to know they can talk to somebody, that they can call them, they can text them, you can handle their needs, help them with tax, like all of that. So that's super high touch service. It's great.
So it's basically a white glove service for
white glove service. Yeah. And you know, the qualifications, like basically we turn on that service for anybody that intends to buy $100,000 or more of Bitcoin over the next 12 months.
Okay.
And that's how we always have that service for them. So, you know, basically I'd say like I think the largest customer has probably bought like 55 or 60 mil from us. And then obviously lots of people have bought like 100 grand. So
you're across the board. I mean, for that's a pretty wide spread, obviously, in the kind of clients that you're servicing. And then you have your average like person who's dollar cost averaging and just wants to fix it and forget it.
Yeah. Well, I think if you're a pension fund and you're thinking of putting like a few $100 million into it, like you're going to get good service from like a Cumberland or a NYDIG, and they're going to have slightly better pricing on the spread. But if you're a small, medium-sized business, or you're a high net worth individual, family office, and you really want that high touch service, like that's what we're built for. We have, I think, of any company, we have the best education in the industry. Obviously, we can't do it full time like Bitcoin Magazine does, but as far as any company,
do a lot.
We have the best education. I'll just say that. And you know, our entire team basically is made up of podcasters, writers, authors, you know, that also do other things, but everybody can create content, and they do constantly. And so it's cool. You've got, you know, you get in touch with us, and, you know, the person on the other end of your support ticket is a hardcore Bitcoiner for the last 5 years and knows everything and everybody. And if you're on a call with a salesperson, that person's been in Bitcoin since 2012 or 2011 or 2014, and they know everything and everybody. And we're kind of, you know, orienting ourselves to be, you know, Bitcoin's customer service team.
But what's so interesting about that is that the core business, obviously, at the beginning was just an easy on-ramp, right? As you said, the cheapest way to dollar cost average, which is how most people should approach Bitcoin. But clearly you're hiring because there's demand for family offices and high net worth individuals. And maybe that wasn't something we would have seen in the last cycle.
I think the high net worth individuals have always been there. Obviously, I think the buying for your company narrative is definitely sparked by Saylor and created a great opportunity. And our entities spend something like 20x the average individual or more. So company accounts are a big deal for us, and we have hundreds of them now, which is really cool.
So we saw this crazy trend sort of at the beginning of the year. Every time I talked to someone at the time, Catherine Coley was the CEO of Binance US, and I had CZ and all these people on, and everyone was saying, listen, we're like doubling our signups, like week over week, 10 times a month over what we're doing. A lot of that was Doge for all of them, apparently. They told me. They were all pretty clear about that. It was sort of after GameStop, and the Robinhood debacle. But I'm curious if you were seeing that sort of level of ramp up earlier in the year. But then the corollary is I haven't talked to anyone about this since the price dropped. So are we seeing a slowdown?
Well, the interesting thing about people that have the propensity to choose Swan is they probably know a decent bit about Bitcoin, and we're not out there at the top of funnel advertising on, Pomp and Real Vision or whatever. Sure. So you're kind of a little bit down the rabbit hole, or a real Bitcoiner that's going to point you towards Swan, or you've got to kind of find out about us still. We still haven't spent any money on paid ads. That's actually starting later this month, which is pretty cool.
Good.
So I think what that means is that these people are naturally more into hodling and more likely to buy a dip. And so our 3 biggest weeks in company history were the last 3 weeks of May.
Wow.
Yeah. So May was by far our best month ever.
That's crazy.
We were up, I think, 65% over April. I think May was up 60x over October. So in, 6 or 7 months, we grew run rate sales by like 60x. We put out on Twitter when we crossed like $1 billion run rate sales, I think at the end of April. And then we did another 60% on top of that. So, I think we're a little over 10% of Cash App's Bitcoin volume today. And, kind of our goal is to pass them next year. So that's our goal, is like our signpost is to, and I would love to fail, by the way, because I love Cash App, and I hope they absolutely moon and make that completely impossible for us. It's not like not like I don't like them or something. They're amazing.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of, I like friendly competition, and that's what we're kind of shooting for.
It's such an interesting point though, because we just talked about how retail panicked and sold, but your clients, who some are still retail, are eager to buy the dip and take advantage of the lower prices. I wouldn't have expected that.
But we also don't have a sell button.
It helps.
You can't sell on Swan. So you can call us or get in touch with a support ticket, and we'll facilitate a sale for you. But I don't think we had a sale in May. We had a couple in February or March. We had one in 2020. One person sold one time.
So how do you eventually exit?
You can sell if you want to. Why would you exit though? The whole point is to convert to a Bitcoin standard. Like most people that buy from Swan are, not buying Bitcoin that they plan to sell.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I'm just saying that that's obviously a challenging pitch probably for the masses when they're not
we don't
already
pitch it.
Bitcoiners.
I mean, they can sell. They just have to get in touch.
I love it.
We like that little friction point. It's okay.
If you've been paying any attention to me or have been following me for any length of time, then you know I absolutely love Voyager. Every single time someone tweets me or asks me, hey, Scott, where do you trade and invest? The answer is always Voyager. They offer over 50 assets to trade, commission free. I save so much money, it almost feels too good to be true. And that's not even my favorite part of Voyager. My favorite part is the insane interest that I earn. Up to 10% on my USDC, 6.25% on my Bitcoin, and 5.25% on my Ethereum. Whether I'm trading or not, I'm earning interest on what's sitting on the platform. Making money literally couldn't be easier, and there are no lockups or limits. Go to thewolfofallstreets.link/Voyager. That's Voyager, and download the Voyager app and use code SCOTT25 to get $25 in free Bitcoin when you create your account. What are you waiting for? Go download Voyager. Guys, I really hope that all of you are not still trading on the old platforms like Uniswap when there are much better options like Matcha, and now Matcha has upgraded to 2.0. Now, I've told you about Matcha a number of times. They have limit orders, which these other platforms don't, which is absolutely incredible, so you don't have to sit there staring at your screen waiting for that perfect moment to enter or exit a trade. And they also aggregate liquidity from all of the different platforms, finding you the best price and reduced fees. But now they have Matcha 2.0 and have added so many awesome features. Matcha is now the only DEX with an integrated fiat on-ramp. You can put your dollars directly onto the platform. They also now have OTC trading for orders between 1K and 1 million, which is beyond huge. And maybe most importantly, Matcha now supports trading on Polygon, meaning that those gas fees will almost evaporate completely. Now, if you guys want to check out Matcha, which you absolutely should, you can do that at the wolfofallstreets.link/matcha. That's the wolfofallstreets.link/matcha. Please check them out. I'm telling you, it will save you so much money and is such a superior experience. Do it now. So I'm curious, back to El Salvador, because it still really is the biggest news that we've got. What do you think this looks like for adoption from other nations? I mean, do you think that, because immediately we saw Paraguay, Panama, Brazil, at least one guy, one politician in each country either turn on laser eyes or say something was coming.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's like a planned rollout here? There's more coming, or do you think that this is just sort of like the straw that's going to break the camel's back in Central and South America? Or do you think that we'll be disappointed and El Salvador will stand alone?
Well, even if they do stand alone for a long time, carrying the torch and carrying the banner and showing that it can be done is really important. So it's a win no matter what. Nobody else, no other public company has done convertible bond offerings like MicroStrategy to buy Bitcoin, but it's still amazing, and it still gets him on Hannity last night and whatever else. Like, he's in the news cycle all the time, and it's cool, and it's a signal to other companies to at least be making buys. So I think it's good no matter what. I think there were some special circumstances with a new young administration with a 90% approval rating and also no local currency. So they already didn't have a printing press.
They have the dollar. Yeah.
They have the dollar, right? So they already can't print money. So it's not that much of a difference for them compared to some other countries. So I would be looking for countries where, they're probably already using the dollar as their currency, or at least have the dollar or the euro as a legal currency, as legal tender in the country. And there's actually quite a large list of countries that have that. Whereas second major currency is also legal tender, because that actually provides a little bit of a check, and they're kind of used to that check on money printing for their own local currency if they have one. And that opens the door to think about Bitcoin the same way.
Do you think that we could see a transition where Bitcoin becomes not just the smaller little cousin of the dollar in El Salvador, but becomes the most used legal tender in the country? Or do you think that it just kind of remains a small part of it and they still remain largely on the dollar?
I think they'll remain largely on the dollar for the foreseeable future. I think we're probably, at least 10, maybe 15 years away from Bitcoin being a widely used medium of exchange, like in large swaths of the world. And that's just because I think the price is going to keep going up for a long time, and just doesn't make a lot of sense to spend Bitcoin unless it's the only money that you have to spend. So, but I guess in that respect, if you're receiving Bitcoin and you're planning to spend it pretty quickly, then it doesn't really matter what the volatility is all that much. And then if you're planning to save it, if you can orange pill these people and help them learn, you're better off saving for the long term. If you don't have to tap into that savings, saving in Bitcoin is a good idea. What I think though, is when you don't have much of a cushion, whether you're a business or an individual, you really can't risk the volatility of Bitcoin if you would have to tap into that savings. So really only the short-term savings can't really be Bitcoin for these people. The long-term savings can. So the long-term so if there's three things, if there's long-term savings, short-term savings, and your working capital that you can just spend, the working capital and the long-term savings can both be Bitcoin today, but that short-term savings really cannot.
Isn't that one of the biggest problems, not for Bitcoin necessarily, but for humanity in general? I mean, isn't that the problem that we're starting to see with hyperinflation? And, if goods are 5% more expensive this May than they were last May, but your paycheck isn't going up, then, effectively you can never save anything because you're living check to check and things are becoming more expensive. So how does Bitcoin solve for that for those people, which is the majority of people who never have enough money to save? Because Bitcoin is the most incredible hard asset there is to invest in. I think we all agree, but you only need to store value if you're wealthy and have value to store. It's a challenging thing.
Listen, everybody can save a little bit. There's always something that you can choose to put away. And it's one of the reasons that we don't jack up fees. Our fees are the same for people doing $10 a month, which is our smallest plan, right? And we want to keep it that way forever and make it that easy to just get started and put in what you can, as you're comfortable. So that's interesting. The other one is, as an economy Bitcoinizes, or just, Bitcoin starts to have more of an effect, is used by more people, it doesn't have to completely supplant the local currency. It can just provide a check on the money printing, because if you're irresponsible, then people will use Bitcoin instead. So if you're inflating too far, then, country after country already, wherever inflation is rampant, Bitcoin purchases skyrocket.
Right.
And so I think what will happen is basically you'll see inflation sort of brought under control as Bitcoin rises because of open competition with Bitcoin, because people can exit the financial system of their local economy without having to exit physically, which is something Andreas always pointed out in his videos. Like, this is the first time you can, vote with your wallet and not with your feet. What does Bitcoin actually do for people that can't buy a lot of Bitcoin? I think what it does is it provides that check on inflation. I want to answer that very clearly.
I agree with that.
Even if you don't own Bitcoin, you benefit from a lot of other people owning Bitcoin, because it is a check on tyranny and it's a check on money printing around the world in each local economy.
That's a great point. So it has power whether you can afford to invest in it right now or not. As an individual.
It will lower it. The expectation is that it will lower inflation for you.
That makes perfect sense. Going back to what I was saying, do you believe that right now, I mean, with Lightning Network or the existing structure for Bitcoin, if you're an average person in one of these countries and you do not have much money, can you live solely with Bitcoin? Can you transact fast enough? Does the volatility matter? Yeah. Do you think that it's at a point where it can be used as your everyday money?
Well, if you're paycheck to paycheck, and you're spending substantially all of your paycheck, the volatility really doesn't matter. So yeah, you can use Bitcoin as your medium of exchange. And I think that's what you're kind of seeing with Bitcoin Beach and El Zonte in El Salvador. And I think you'll see a lot of people just kind of use sats. It will happen because it's available. I actually think, and this is, I'm an investor in Breeze, but I think this is kind of like a really important milestone coming up, and I'm playing with it on test flight, but it launches in the App Store for iOS in a month or two. It'll be, I think, the first time that you can just download an app and receive sats non-custodial. So you don't have to worry about KYC or anything. You have your private keys. I was playing around with it. I'm pretty much a Lightning novice, but somebody challenged me to, send them, 100 sats and let them download it and own it non-custodially. And I asked everybody, how do you do this? Where can you do this? And there's nothing in market where you could actually do that. Right. You can do that with Breeze, and I'm sure that other ones will follow suit, and you don't need to be running anything complicated and it's yours. So I think, just abstracting away some of the complicated stuff, and, maybe just companies abstracting away the setting up of, or open source projects abstracting away needing to open up channels and worry about, channel management and liquidity and inbound and outbound or whatever, all this complicated Lightning stuff that, you can hear about from Guy Swan or anybody else that uses Lightning all the time. I'm not there. I just haven't had the time, even though I really appreciate it and love what's going on. But when you make it that easy, which Strike is doing custodially, and which Breeze is going to be doing non-custodially, I think that is game changing.
Do you think that we should be talking in terms of sats and not Bitcoin?
I don't know.
It matters?
No.
You don't think that, like, because obviously there's been a big push, kind of a marketing campaign for Bitcoin is, hey, let's talk about sats because people think they need to own one whole Bitcoin at, $37,000 today as opposed to sats.
I mean, I don't think it makes sense until you have it's going to be hard to shift your mental model with unit of account until Bitcoin's volatility versus the US dollar, which is kind of the global unit of account for goods and services, like purchasing power is measured in dollars, until the volatility of Bitcoin versus dollars is dramatically lower. I think that'll be very difficult. And, I don't think that'll happen until at least 10 or 20 trillion dollar market cap. So right. I would say 500 grand to $1 million, somewhere in there, you'll see dramatically lowered volatility, and people will be able to actually price goods and services in sats without having to change the price every day.
That makes sense.
I think it's just very difficult to think about pricing goods and services in Bitcoin today to a mass audience. Like for Bitcoiners, sure. Like, yeah, you can just be like, I'm selling this course for 0.1 Bitcoin or 0.01 Bitcoin or whatever. And, Bitcoiners are just happy to support because you're selling Bitcoin shit.
One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. Right?
But if you're selling like gardening services or a sweatshirt, that has a surf brand on it, you're going to have to change that price all the time.
I mean, it's interesting is that, we want, it's kind of that bipolarity there as well, as you want Bitcoin to be a medium of exchange and used all the time, but nobody wants to part with their Bitcoin, right?
It's just the natural path that an asset takes as it monetizes, right? And it's fuzzy, but basically most people, you need a lot of people to have a lot of their net worth in Bitcoin for it to start being used as a medium of exchange widely. The people that are using Bitcoin to spend today are people that got in early, and Bitcoin's already 100% of their net worth or 90% of their net worth, and they don't have anything else to spend. So of course they have to spend Bitcoin. They don't have anything else. That's where we got to get. And that means a lot more people in, a lot more of their net worth in Bitcoin, and the price of Bitcoin being a lot higher. And then you'll see it very widely used as a medium of exchange and eventually a unit of account.
That's why I saw the Elon Musk, Tesla is not going to accept Bitcoin for cars as such a laughable news event for people to use as a narrative for a crashing market, because I can't imagine there were more than 50 people on the planet that wanted to buy a car that depreciates 30% when you drive it off the lot with their Bitcoin.
Yeah, it makes no sense. It just adds friction. Like that was like my beef with these folks that got together to try to give Bitcoin to the campaigns of senators and Congress people last year. Like, what a dumb idea. It was just obscenely stupid, because all you did was just introduce friction by using a bad medium of exchange. You basically wrecked their conception of what Bitcoin is. Like, the right thing to do would be to give some Bitcoin to the people themselves, even if the max gift is $50, $150, whatever it is. Get them actually owning some Bitcoin personally, not jam this shitty medium of exchange in between that somebody buys Bitcoin for dollars and then they sell it immediately for dollars, and you've introduced this friction for no reason. It's stupid. It is useful for international transfers, specifically because of Lightning now, but also it is amazing just to be able to use an on-chain transaction and pay a contractor over in, the other side of the world, pretty quickly with very low fees. And we do it all the time. Obviously, we do a lot of our payroll, sending people Bitcoin. And I think this remittance thing that's going on in El Salvador is just going to be awesome. It's clearly a humanitarian boon for the people that get to participate in that. And I think you'll see Strike and others do that over and over again. There are a lot of remittance and, sort of money transfer companies that have actually been using stable coins and Bitcoin for years. They're just not well known among Bitcoiners because they just do finance stuff and their fees are higher.
Right. I'm curious because I don't want to make any assumptions, but as a hardcore Bitcoiner, some would say that stable coins are better for what you just described, right? You can send USDC or USDT or something to someone anywhere in the world in the smallest fractional amount possible, pretty cheap, depending on the network you choose to do it on. And
Yeah.
that's so far superior to a Swift or ACH transfer across the world. So maybe, I mean, do you agree that in some cases, stable coins are better for that than Bitcoin?
I don't think it matters what you're using to send. It's just, do they want to receive dollars or Bitcoin?
Right.
That's all. It's just like the US dollar is the global reserve currency and Bitcoin is the money of the future. And it's the hardest, best money ever. So what do you want to receive? It doesn't matter really how you get it to them.
So what does that Bitcoinized future that you keep mentioning look like? What does it look like if we get to a Bitcoin standard? What's the timeline for that? And what does the world look like in that case? Because that, to some degree, likely requires the dollar exploding.
I don't think it has to explode. I think what we're talking about is, price tags with two currencies on them. You gotta go to Turkey and you see the lira and the euro. Go to the airport in France and you see the dollar and the euro and the pound or whatever. Like I think it'll be like that. So I think that Bitcoinization looks like I think that I've been saying for a long time, I think that by 2035, most people in most places around the world will be able to buy most goods and services priced in sats. That both sides of that market, buyer and seller, will understand the purchasing power of sats and will be able to negotiate and price things in sats. It's really kind of an anomaly if you're here in the West and like you only, and really just in the US, where we only know the price of things in dollars. Like everywhere else
we only speak one language.
Everywhere else you go, the price of whatever it is in multiple currencies pretty much. And it's a very easy, our human brain is very facile and able to do that. It's not a big deal at all. You can price things in yuan and yen and dollars if you're in the Philippines, like it's no big deal. So that's what I think will happen. I think it'll be another major currency that's used globally. It'll dominate the internet and it'll dominate remote work, which is a trend that is accelerating. It'll dominate everything where you've got, disparate teams around the world working on different things. And then I think it'll be a preferred currency in a lot of places where, their local currency has failed.
Right. That's interesting. I mean, I think that's a conservative and reasonable view on what could happen, because sometimes you drill into, I guess, more maximalist thinking, not that there's anything wrong with it, but you'll hear people saying that'll happen in 2 years. The dollar will blow up, like all these things. You're just kind of saying that Bitcoin will organically grow. People will see how important it is and it will become, more viable and used around the world without having to go Mad Max dystopian future to get there.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the soft landing thing that I think was first floated by Nick Bhatia and Safe talks about it as well, is that, the supply of dollars can decrease as demand for dollars decreases. So if Bitcoin is taking up more of the pie over time because people want to hold more Bitcoin, they'll just print fewer dollars. And you can actually maintain, a relatively stable purchasing power for the dollar. Bitcoin will continue to rise and the purchasing power of Bitcoin will be increasing, and it'll increase as individuals making up a market make their own calculation based on their understanding of how much they think Bitcoin will be worth in purchasing power or versus the dollar over what time frame, and that matches their own risk appetite and sort of the horizon of, well, I'm 75 and I've got a lot of dollars, I don't need that much Bitcoin. Right. Stuff like that. And it'll just kind of take its natural place. But I think in the long haul game, theoretically, it ends up taking over global money. But I don't think that'll even happen by 2035. I think it's like a 2070 thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love the long view because there's so many people who get into this market and just view it sort of speculatively. Right. And they don't have a 50-year view or a 60-year view. People like us who talk about leaving our Bitcoin to our kids, I think, are few and far between.
Yeah. Well, what happens if you think that it's going to the moon immediately and that it won't have pullbacks, you're going to over allocate, you're going to leverage up, you're going to completely wreck yourself. And so I think this is the whole philosophy we have, like slow and steady wins the race. All sats under $5 million Bitcoin are cheap for the foreseeable future. So just kind of, put in whatever you think is, based on your own situation. If you have a portfolio, liquid portfolio, like put in whatever percentage that you think you need. And then as you make more money and you have expenses, decide how much of your regular fiat inflows you're going to put into Bitcoin, set it and forget it. Most people are not as good a trader as you and some of our mutual friends, so like the core of your savings and your plans for the future should just be steady accumulation of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So in the future that you're discussing, where things are priced both in dollars or euros and Bitcoin, and it sort of becomes a global reserve currency, you have to imagine in that future that the central banks themselves are going to start adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets, right?
Yeah, I think that'll happen way before. Yeah, I think it's already been happening.
Dude, yeah. I mean, I have the belief that it's already happening too. It's just in the places we don't hear about.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they just, it's not that hard, frankly, to accumulate a few $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. It's a big market.
I mean, we've seen Michael Saylor do it in a weekend, right? I mean, so it's...
You can do that quietly with agents and LLCs and whatever that are owned by entities that own entities that are split with entities that roll up to the government.
Yeah. So you believe it's already happening?
I do. Yeah. I mean, 193 countries or whatever. Like, I think there's got to be at least 10 or 20 that own Bitcoin.
Yeah. And I mean, Russia's already talking about basically, eliminating their dollars. What are you gonna buy?
Yeah. More gold. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't see that as being the natural path there. So, I mean, we've talked about institutional adoption in this cycle. Obviously, you're seeing it from the family offices in the lower level. What do you think it takes for us to see pensions and endowments and this massive wall of money? I mean, Coinbase today said they're going to allow 5% in a 401k. So now we're seeing 401ks added on top of like self-directed IRAs. But when do we see the pensioners coming in and getting exposure? Is it an ETF? Is it just more time? Is it more infrastructure?
It doesn't need to be an ETF. It's just these people having the meetings, I mean, I think it's mostly NYDIG and Galaxy carrying the water for the rest of us right now, talking to the pension funds and the endowments and stuff. And they're doing a great job. I think Galaxy announced they hired a head of IR today. That screams pensions. That's what that person does. So there's a head of investor relations at Galaxy now. That's what that demand from those people is why you hire that person.
Right. But do you think that they can get past compliance right now to even buy Bitcoin? Or do you think that
they already have, there's already pensions and endowments that do it. There is a playbook. It's just a matter of like doing the meetings and, hacking through their process. It's a long process and you need sophisticated people to get through that process from a paperwork standpoint, from a, it's consultative selling. Can be 12 months. For some of them, they'll do due diligence 3 years. Yeah. So it's very likely that we don't see a big rush of pension money this cycle because, and if you did, you might see like quick selling too, like if you, I worry very much about institutions actually having, well, pensions won't, they'll just buy it with some tiny percentage and keep it for frickin' ever. But, this company treasury angle definitely has the risk of accelerating a down cycle and making it, deep and precipitous.
It's fun to watch them make tons of money on Bitcoin, but when their risk engine starts triggering and they're not going to be the company that's going to take a loss on Bitcoin, it's pretty risky. And I mean, listen, we all love Michael Saylor, but he's a unicorn, right? I mean, what Elon Musk did is probably more in line with what you would expect from most institutions. You're going to buy it, but then when he sees an opportunity to pad earnings in a quarter that they couldn't deliver a single Model S or a Model X, and their only money is being made on energy credits and selling Bitcoin, they're going to sell some, right? Because it's what they have to do for their company.
Yeah. And however they spend it doesn't really matter. It's probably what happened. Or Ruffin, saw their position go way up and they were like, you know what? Chalk up the W. These are individuals that have bonuses and they look super smart getting out. And I use the example of like, let's say that we rip up from, 35 or 40 or wherever we are today. And we go up to like 365, new all-time high. Somebody started putting in the plans to purchase back in January because they attended Ross and Saylor's thing. And so they buy at 75 and they finally get it done. And, some, Fortune 200 company buys $200 million worth of Bitcoin. Price keeps going up, goes up to 250. Awesome. retail causes that giant, 40K candle in the last 2 days of that bull run. And it kind of crashes and it comes down and it's like up, down, up, down, down, down. Now it's at 150. This guy that made the allocation and argued for it, his position is down from 250 to 150. He's down 40% from his peak. And he was kind of crowing about it literally a week ago. And he's like, wow, I could really just I could chalk up a 2X here and
get
sleep again. I'm taking the 2X.
That guy's
and now you have a bunch of selling pressure at 150, which you're already down 40%. So, I don't think that institutions, unless they're as orange pilled as Saylor, unless they've actually done the hard work of really educating themselves, I think they have paper hands and they won't act much different from retail. So education is really the key, as always. And my company was founded on education. The first product was bundling a gift of Bitcoin with Bitcoin education. Everybody we hire is an educator. The only thing that creates diamond hands is actually understanding Bitcoin deeply, not worrying that is it deviating from a stock to flow model, or not thinking having cycles. So I timed this right, not thinking in fiat terms. You have to understand where this thing's going and understand what Bitcoin actually is. You can only do that with 100 hours.
Yeah, you got to dig in deep. You do, because I think always one of the hardest things about crypto Bitcoin is it's just hard to explain to a 12-year-old. It's the classic is most people you ask, explain what Bitcoin is, and 30 minutes later you're asleep. And and I think that's always been a challenge of messaging and marketing.
Until it isn't, because someday it'll just be money and it'll be the given, money. Right? And you don't have to explain the internet, and you won't have to explain Bitcoin because it's just our money.
Right. You don't explain how your phone works. You just use it.
Yeah,
right?
That's just my phone.
So you mentioned orange pilling institutions. You're writing a book, right? Or wrote a book, Bitcoin, Your Bright Orange Future. Tell me about that.
Yeah. I mean, it is. So it's done. We're doing art and layout right now, and we'll get it out sometime this summer. But it's been a great process going through it and trying to think about how best to actually take somebody from a standing start, and really written for the type of customer that we want at Swan, which is, kind of the average normie pleb or high net worth individual. So kind of all encompassing what we think is kind of the right framing and the right stacking and the right order to the best of our ability to kind of lay out that case. 12 chapters, get through it. Not a long read. I think it's probably 2.5 to 3 hour read. It'll have a great audio version of it. And yeah, I think it'll be a helpful addition. I think, my favorite book so far for introducing somebody to Bitcoin, it's been my top reco for a couple of years, is Inventing Bitcoin by Jan Pritzker, who I obviously recruited to be my co-founder and CTO at Swan after reading the book. And I think it just does such a nice job. He's just such a great educator, and but he breaks it down in a certain way that is kind of the way he would explain it. And he's an engineer, and and it's got its own style. Right. And I think people that read that book and read my book, some people will choose one and some people will choose the other. And it's just kind of based on what of your friend that you're trying to orange pill.
So can we get Elizabeth Warren to read your book? Think you can get her on board, and the Mungers and the Buffetts and the Warrens and the people who emotionally are just opposed?
No, actually Nick Carter is responsible for Elizabeth Warren. I'm responsible for Ted Lieu and Brad Sherman and all the LA politicians, but Nick has to handle the Massachusetts people.
You think you can do it?
Listen, I don't think that it matters at all. I don't think Buffett and Munger,
they're not coming around.
They're irrelevant before they die. They'll just die not understanding Bitcoin. Unless they have an incentive to, and the people that are in finance and don't want to have egg on their face. And I mean that actually active investors like Dalio, right. It's much more of an ego hit for him to be wrong year after year.
And it wasn't. And that's been an interesting change, I think, in the last year, is that you had reputational risk if you talked about Bitcoin. And now we've shifted, I think, to reputational risk if you don't at least look at it. You have to take it seriously now.
Yeah, I think you do. But yeah, I think that that distinction is like, he's been more of like a financial investor and trading instruments and things like that. Whereas, Berkshire is like, let's buy big companies and just hold them forever. Right. So it's a different orientation. Bill Gates doesn't need to talk about Bitcoin in his circles. Warren doesn't really need to talk about Bitcoin in his circles, but like Dalio does need to talk about Bitcoin in his circles. And I think, him sort of just parroting what his lieutenants or his social circle was saying in 2016, 2017, wasn't going to cut it as it got noisier and as people that, he looked up to or was being compared to were being lauded for actually understanding something that he didn't. I think it kind of pressured him into actually spending the time.
I agree. But I love seeing these guys switch over. I mean, I think it's a mark of intelligence, right? Like,
yeah,
even Saylor was vehemently opposed to Bitcoin in the early years.
What I'd love to see is to see people who we think are intelligent stop spouting off on Bitcoin before they know much about it. Yeah, I think that is like, whether it's Elon or Jason Calacanis or, any of these talking heads talking about Bitcoin before they've done the work. It's just, you're just exposing yourself as an intellectual fraud, basically. And Dalio was in that category. Yeah, he's winning me back now because like he's set aside his ego. It doesn't change the fact that he was spouting off without having done the research and without understanding what he was talking about a few years ago. That's a big black. Right. It's a big black mark on his record. Yeah, can't trust him. Can't trust Taleb anymore.
Well, he called me an idiot, so I've joined the club finally of the people that Taleb has called an idiot on Twitter. I feel very, very entitled now.
Yeah, well, we can have a beer over that. I got a thinly veiled. I got retweeted by him with bit idiots. I think there was a hashtag, so he learned hashtags.
We are there. You go. In the Taleb idiot club. That talk about someone that like. I admire the guy. I think he was brilliant, but man, is he bad at social media.
Man, I have all 5 on hard copy, ebook, Audible, and the box set.
Wow.
And I've read Antifragile probably 15 times, Black Swan probably 7, Fooled by Randomness probably 10, Skin in the Game probably 4 or 5, but it's new. I've even read the frickin' Bed of Procrustes like 6 times.
That I have not read. I've read the others.
Good. It's a good bathroom book because it's just maxims. It's little short, sayings,
so
basically.
Knock it out in 5 minutes. Yeah.
Knock it out. It's still sitting on the toilet over there. But it's just really disappointing, like it's just so funny to see somebody exhibit all of the characteristics that his writing rails against.
It's unbelievable.
It's like, dude, you're so fragile. You clearly don't have skin in the game. Like you're fooled by randomness and you don't recognize the biggest black swan in history. And you're trying to fit this thing into a paradigm that you do understand when it's actually something different, which is, essentially Procrustes' bed. Like, and he's being a freaking IYI. Like he rails against intellectual yet idiots. And what is he doing? It's pretty sad.
I can't think of a better place to end than there since I know we've only got like 2 minutes left. So where can everybody find
by the way, officially Swan Bitcoin is actually named now after not Nassim's Black
not that Swan.
Not that Swan. It's officially named after Bitcoin at one time when it was early. It was like an ugly duckling and now it's growing into this beautiful swan. So
I like it.
Now Swan Bitcoin is this beautiful swan.
He's out. He's out.
He's out. No more black.
Thank you. So where can everybody follow you and people who want to become customers? Where should they?
Yeah. So if you want that high touch sales experience, swanbitcoin.com/private. You can talk to me or Steven or Terrence and one more new salesperson who's pretty well known, but we are not public about. And swanbitcoin.com/ do you have a ref link? I forget.
I don't. No, I don't.
Anyway,
but use yours.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway,
swanbitcoin.com.
Swanbitcoin.com. Well, if you want to get the $10 free on sign up, swanbitcoin.com/Satoshi will work.
Cool.
But that's the URL. We've got an app coming out in this summer, so that'll be cool. It'll be a lot more accessible and open to everybody to have it in the App Store, Android and iOS. I'm Cory Klippsten on Twitter. YouTube, all our shows are at youtube.com/swansignal. You can even go back and watch your host here on an episode from a few months back.
Talked about altcoins. I got in trouble, but
come on, dude. Know your audience.
I know. Know your audience. Absolutely. It's like showing up at an EDM festival and playing 70s rock.
Oh my God. Well, I think Daft Punk does that every freaking show. But I think, and one other thing. So Bitcoiner Ventures, which is AngelList Syndicate investing in great Bitcoin startups. We invested in Unchained last year, Bitrefill earlier this year. We have a deal live currently. So you can find the AngelList Syndicate is actually linked like halfway down the page at bitcoinerventures.com. Check that out, or search for Bitcoiner Ventures on AngelList if you're already on there. I think we're like 2/3 filled on the current deal, but it's an awesome company. Love it. I can't say it publicly because it's security.
Right.
Altcoiners should learn that.
Not securities yet.
Exactly. No, but just a big fan of getting involved in the ecosystem. And, while I think Bitcoin is the best asset that anybody could possibly hold, I also think that it's very educational to have that selective attention for what's going on in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And so part of my personal investment in my own education and being, more into Bitcoin is just making small investments into Bitcoin startups. Every few months, just cut a check for like $5,000 or something like that.
Yeah,
but it can be
picks and shovels, man.
It can be as small as $1,000.
Well, thank you, man, so much for doing this. I think it was a really valuable episode, and I can't wait to follow up down the road and see how Swan's progressing. So thank you.